Welcome to a very special episode of the Hidden History Happy Hour. It's our 50th anniversary. It's our 50th episode, my friend.
our 50th anniversary is some way away, but
Not
I'm
our 50th
delighted.
anniversary. Now, listen, I was going to pop a bottle of expensive champagne for this august occasion. And my fiance said, no, your podcast is not worth that at all. So,
I have so much champagne left over for my wedding. I'd have sent you one had I known.
well, we'll save it for the 100th episode. How about that?
I agree. I don't know which. So I am drinking both a word from and a word to our sponsors. The word from our sponsors is that this Blue Run bourbon is going down extremely well, and the word to our sponsors is that this Blue Run bourbon has gone down extremely well, and this bottle is running a little on empty.
I don't know if we can export now. I believe I hand delivered that to you, didn't I?
You did, but I'm going to see you pretty soon.
That is true. We'll make that work. We will make that work. I'll tell you what. Bring me a bottle of champagne. I'll bring you a bottle of Blue Run.
Done.
Cheers. Now, what I'm enjoying, since I wasn't allowed to use the champagne, is in honor of our story today. I'm enjoying a Tempranillo, which of course is a Spanish red. However, to be honest, not very good. So I'm not going to give the name to our viewers.
I love Spanish wine. I love port. I don't like port particularly, but I love Portuguese wine. I went to a restaurant here in the UK in London called Bar Duro before we were recording today, and I had some Vino Verde, which is the green wine. They grow. It's acquired taste because a lot of people find it very sharp. It's grown very high. When you come in flying into Lisbon, you'll often see it right up on the top of the highest hills. They pick it early. Some people find it sharp, almost sour, but I love it. So the Iberia for me is a great place for booze, and Spanish wine I think is fantastic.
I do too, in general. And on my bucket list is to visit the Douro area and spend some quality time there. This was hit or miss. We got it. We like a lot of Tempranillo. Next time I'll be more careful, but won't stop me from drinking it, of course, because anything for the show.
Well, that's that kind of commitment that's made you the man you are. My eyes were opened to the Douro a lot by a wine importer in the UK called Red Squirrel, which merged with another wine importer, and they're very clever. They called their new business Graft because they merged these two companies. I'm kind of down on them though, because the owner of that business, a guy called Nick Darlington, who runs marathons constantly, and he's taller than me and he's good looking. God, I hate the bastard. But he really opened my eyes to Spanish wine, reds particularly.
Yeah, very good stuff. Well, look, we got a lot of 50th anniversary talk to happen in a bit here, but let's launch right into our story for today. And this is your choice, viewers, because you voted in our poll that you wanted a crime story, and we have one for you.
Correct. So the decision was to have a story about crime, and I therefore turned up my volume 2 copy of More Lessons from History to chapter 80, When Winning is Losing. And the story goes like this. It's about a guy called Jacinto Zambrano, Spanish shopkeeper. He had this fantastic barkeeper. He had this great get rich quick scheme, which of course people who promulgate them always think couldn't possibly fail. In the 1980s, Spain had this annual lottery, still running today. One of our listeners told me after I told the story on Twitter, so I got it right for the book. It's still in existence. And the annual lottery comes around but once a year, and it's called El Gordo, which means the fat one. It's a really big prize, and the main prize is huge, and tickets are correspondingly expensive. And Jacinto Zambrano buys a ticket and he pins it up in his bar for everyone to see. And those who came into his bar in Palencia, not a mispronunciation, I don't mean Valencia. Palencia is a little town in northern Spain. Customers who came into his bar were offered the opportunity to buy a 1/50th stake in the ticket. He's in a poor neighborhood. Tickets are expensive. People couldn't afford a ticket for themselves. So the take-up was full. He sold all allotments. The trouble was, he thought the great way to make money here was to sell it 5 times over. So he sold a 50th share to 250 people. Now, those people, of course, noted down the numbers on the ticket. They tuned in their radios. They turned on their TV for the announcement. Even though this was a gamble, they're fantastically unlikely to win. They were really, committed in their minds to this prospect of an amazing future. And this foolproof, if plainly fraudulent scheme, I'm afraid, failed to consider one thing. He had incredibly bad luck. He won the lottery. he'd sold he'd sold a 50th share 250 times, and therefore on Christmas Eve, 2 days after so they draw it just before Christmas, 2 days after the lottery result was announced, Christmas Eve 1986, the Spanish police find themselves presented with the easiest fraud to conclude in the history of policing, because he hands himself into the local police station for his own protection. Well, I just love being the bemused desk sergeant. Someone turns up and says, "Here is what I've done, and for my own good, I'm now going to tell you exactly how I've done it. Please arrest me." Please arrest me, and please put me away from the people of the small town, all of whom are now out to get me. I love that story, and that was a reminder of that's the answer to our poll on criminology and request for a crime story. Bryan, I just want to give you one footnote, because I had a lot of discussion after I told that story online about the plan in the inspired Mel Brooks movie, The Producers, in which our heroes seek to find a play which is guaranteed to be a massive flop, which will enable them to walk away with the money from the backers. And to their astonishment, of course, Springtime for Hitler, which is the name of the play that they put on, turns out to be a smash hit. And there's a great dialogue between the two principals. One says, "Leo, how much percentage of a play can there be altogether?" Leo says, "Max, you can only have 100% of anything." Well, how much of Springtime for Hitler have we sold? 25,000%.
Yeah, that death charge must have been like, "Come again, sir." I would like the record to reflect, Alex, that as a special 50th episode gift to you, I did not interrupt that story at all.
That is a 50th first.
Yes. Now, it was only a 2-minute story, but still, it's a great story. It's reminiscent of almost every Ponzi scheme that's happened since, with the exception of choosing jail over the mob. Do we know anything about either what it's like in Spanish jail or whatever happened to him after he got out?
I don't, and I suppose the fact that that doesn't come up when as you know, I have to research the stories that I tell in the book, and sometimes people are disappointed. So I'm now nudging 200 stories online, many more than in the two books, and the books have some stories too that aren't told online. So all in all, I'm over 200 stories told all up. I research each and every one of them. There are some that I can't publish because I can't stand them up. This one I researched, and I can't find any further trace of him, and I think that's probably a good sign. I think it's probably a good sign he didn't get shanked or something in prison. I don't mean to giggle as I say shanked, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I'm going to circle back to your process, because I want our viewers to know more about that. But just to this issue of him preferring the law to the mob, we're both various degrees of recovering lawyers, you and I.
Yeah.
And one of the most misunderstood and misrepresented lines in all of Shakespeare is, "First thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers," which was in fact said, but it was said by a dastardly character who wanted to rule the world. And his plan was, you get rid of the lawyers, then you have anarchy, then we take over.
It's said by a bad guy. And I was, he said immodestly, plugging his media appearances elsewhere. I was doing an appearance on a channel we have here in the UK, appropriately called GB News. And I was...
sorry to interrupt you. Now I'm going to interrupt you since I didn't before. Was that, by any chance, that name of the network thought up by the same geniuses that came up with More Lessons from History?
More Lessons from History. Do you know what? We've got so many talented advertising and commissioning people. I think it was separate people. I see why you made the connection. I was talking with a host who said that, whose view, and I like this person and respect this person, but her view was that if you are suspected of terrorism, then you should be automatically ruled not to be a legitimate asylum seeker or refugee coming to the UK. And my point was, but our authorities refuse to present any evidence of terrorism in these cases, because they fear revealing sources and methods
Right.
and so forth. So they've got these. There aren't many. There's like 19 identified individuals who've come to the UK and claimed asylum or refugee status, who are on watch lists, effectively, who are on named lists of people who are suspected of terrorism. And I said, but our authorities refuse to disclose any evidence. She said, so what? They should be out anyway. And that's where you lose me. I'm a good law and order person, but this is my point about it's the bad guys who say hang all the lawyers, because the rule of law is there to protect all of us. And if in the end it's merely the statement you are a terrorist that means you will be excluded from any normal due process, then the statement you, Bryan Cunningham, are a terrorist will be enough to exclude you, for example, from citizenship of the United States, were it to be in your case, or in the United Kingdom if it was mine. And the other point I always try to make to individuals like this as a criminal lawyer hack is that when the case appears against somebody to be strong, that's when they need the help of their lawyer the most. And that's what you would want your lawyers to think, and you would want them to believe in your innocence, because the presumption of innocence is genuinely meaningful. It doesn't apply only if it's applied in the case of people who are palpably innocent and everybody likes. It's in tough cases where the individual is unattractive and their case is unattractive that those things matter the most. Anyway, I'm droning on a bit, but the reason I say all that was to your point about the law being a fruitful protection for us all. Those protections are there for all of us.
Yeah. Well, I always tell my clients who are disdainful of our profession that there's only one thing worse than your lawyer, and that's the other guy's lawyer.
Right.
And also, this puts me in mind of, I can't believe I can't remember this. One of our founding fathers, I'm going to guess John Adams, but I'm not certain, famously said regarding our presumption of innocence and due process that better 100, I'm going to garble this a little bit, better 100 guilty men go free than one innocent man go to prison, or something like that.
Yeah, I don't recall which of your luminaries that was, but you had a generation who, well, they were British, really, weren't they? So as we can both claim them. There was a generation of uniquely talented writers who had an amazing turn of phrase. Thank goodness, because your Constitution, as written, was one of the luminescent documents in the English language. But I think that distillation of wisdom is palpably, in my view, true.
Also, those Englishmen chose leave. I would just note.
Certainly, and they chose to do so within the finest traditions of the English culture. They chose to govern themselves, and I admire and respect their decision, even if ultimately I regret the little local difficulty that resulted. Jury's still out on whether it worked out. Who knows?
Time will tell.
Time will indeed tell. How did we get on to?
I don't know, but it's a good chat. It's a good chat, but let's circle back to our show, because really that's what we're celebrating today. And we have so many more listeners and viewers now than we had at the beginning.
Yeah, it's
thankfully.
amazing.
And thanks to all of you. Cheers to all of you for
cheers to
joining
our
us and
viewers.
Sticking with us.
Thank you very much.
I think it's worth just you telling your origin story one more time. And I know that you absolutely have a hard and fast rule of not retelling stories. Now, me and my daughters will tell you this. I don't mind telling the same story 100 times. So we're not going to retell stories, but we might talk about a little bit of the background of some of the stories that you, our listeners, picked as your favorites. But tell us again the moving story of how you got into this.
Thanks, Bryan. So a couple of years ago, so the last quarter of 2020, when my father was very sick, and I moved back home to live with my parents for his final months. And so I don't know, November 2020, something like that. And he died in the February of 2021.
Right.
And so I did several months of doing as best I could for my father and spending a lot of time with him. And lockdown was cursed by many of us for many reasons, but for that at least it meant that I could go and do a semblance of work on some of those days. And I didn't have any sense I was missing out on anything, because nothing was happening. And they were hard times, Bryan, but they were good times. Anyway, my father's condition meant that he slept a lot, and he was on some medication, which meant he slept a lot. And So I was at home in rural Suffolk. I was at home on the outskirts of Bury St Edmunds, the town I grew up on. We talked about it several times in different stories in the podcast.
Right
And
down the road from the Human Skin Bible.
the Human Skin Bible is in my hometown. That's so correct. And my dad was a great lover of history, and lots of his works of history are around me, and idly turning to different shelves for distraction. I always prefer reading in print if I can to reading on a screen or reading on a device. That I bless that I've got the Kindle app on my phone. I use it all the time, but by preference, if I can, I'll read something in print.
Yeah.
So I was reading some of my dad's old history books, and
Hold on one second. Let me just set the scene for us a little bit, because when you tell this story, I've never been to your father's house. I picture a scene from Clue, like a very tall ceilinged room with dark paneling, with books on all sides, 9 levels up with a ladder that you can move around on wheels to get the books. What is his library like?
Yeah, so there's no ladder, but otherwise you're about right. Property is cheaper when you're outside London, and it's quite a big for 2 retired teachers. They did just fine. I got no. My parents raised a family and did well in the house I grew up in which my mother still lives. And yes, it's a big dining room converted basically into a library, and the shelves are indeed dark, and they are indeed tall. So otherwise you are on the money. And sitting in the middle of the room is my laptop, which I'm still firing off the occasional work email and checking Twitter and so forth.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd started. I find that I learn best through stories, which is not a bad way to learn. It's basically what the parables in the Bible are about. It's basically how we instruct children in the earliest lessons in history. It's how you remember things. And so stories would emerge for me through what I was reading. And I thought that I thought I would tell some stories online. I thought I would tell some stories from history, from the kinds of things that I was reading. And Bryan, honestly, I didn't know if I was going to do 10 of these things. I just thought I'd just tell a couple of stories and see how they went. The amazing thing was that it turned out, I suppose I shouldn't have been so surprised in hindsight, that there were just as many people, as bored as I was, sitting, frustrated, or sitting alone, or sitting without a lot of stimulation, and there were a lot of people who loved history as much as I did. So on the 10th of January 2021, I posted a story about Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, who was one of Napoleon's minions and went off to become King of Sweden. And
if I recall correctly, we still haven't done that story yet, right?
Is that right?
Yeah, I think
that's
we got to
something.
get that one up for next time.
That's the very first.
Yeah.
So
let me ask you a question about that though. How did you pick that as your first story? First of all, just random.
I had no plan. Like, I didn't know this was going to be heavens. I certainly didn't know it was going to be a book, let alone I was going to tell 200 of these things and have a podcast about it. I was just telling a random story that I enjoyed about, the vagaries of destiny, where, the Napoleonic line fizzled out, burned bright, but fizzled out very quickly in France. And the House of Bernadotte is still on the throne of Sweden today.
Yeah.
Right, so it's absolutely, this relatively minor French nobleman gets asked to go off and be king of Sweden because they think it'd be helpful with the French, and so his descendants are still there.
So this just happened to be the story you were reading on the day that you decided to put one out in public.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, correct. And not least, I suppose, like a lot of boys, I like military history, and I've got a friend of mine recommended going to the Hanseatic seaport of Lubeck one day. I still haven't gone, but there's a battle at Lubeck where the French were acquitting themselves pretty admirably against the Prussians, and normally a battle resolves with and the Germans won, but the Prussians were taking a pasting, and their allies the Swedes were in the same boat, and they were treated very well by their French opponents, Bernadotte's principal among them, which is why when these minor Swedish noblemen went home to a problem because their king was going gaga, and they were looking around for somebody to put on the throne. They thought, hey, what about that nice Mr. Bernadotte we met, who didn't execute us and kept us all. He seems pretty close to Napoleon. Wrong, as it turned out. He seemed pretty close to Napoleon. Why don't we get him in? Within a few years, by the way, of being on the throne of Sweden, I'm kind of basically telling the story, but a few years of being on the throne of Sweden, he declared war against France.
Sure.
The man
Why
had
wouldn't
style.
you?
The man,
Hey,
I know. Hey,
listen,
it's an English habit. Who could blame the Swedes?
listen, where you stand depends on where you sit,
That's very true.
for sure. Okay, so that was the first one. You started to get a pretty significant following on Twitter,
Almost
and
immediately, it was very
yeah,
flattering.
yeah. And how do you decide? So, one, I guess, how do you decide which stories from your dad's library you're going to decide to share with us? And then how do you decide? The beauty of both of the books, in my view, is they're either obscure enough that no one's ever heard anything about it, which is a delight, or they're something we all think we know about, but there's a twist to it that we didn't expect. How do you pick your stories, I guess, basically?
So I have really three rules, right? And they're all obvious if you think for a moment, which is helpful for me. I don't claim to be the greatest intellectual in the world, and I certainly don't claim to be a professional historian. Um, Rule number one, it's got to be provable.
Yeah,
I can't just tell an urban legend and say it's a story. I've got to be able to stand it up. Rule number two, it's got to be not too obvious or well known. It's got to have an something to it that is informative beyond the story that everybody knows. Even if extremely well documented, I wouldn't want to tell a story about Robert the Bruce and try again, because everybody in my country at least has heard the story.
right.
And rule number three, got to be short. Right? I'm
Yeah,
telling them on Twitter. One of the reasons that the book has, he said immodestly again, one of the reasons the books are so well is that the stories are short.
yeah,
You can get through one or two in a visit to the smallest room in your house. You can read one or two to a child before they lose attention. And so that's been a winning formula for me. And it's come from telling the stories on social media, where even if you do a thread and the thread is relatively long in social media terms, the story is still short. I am not telling a 5-page story. I'm
yeah.
telling a 2-3 page story.
Yeah, there's a few exceptions, but in general, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, have you thought about? It just occurred to me right now. Have you thought about doing lessons from history for kids? Like
I
for elementary school kids.
You're very so fun. That's one of the things I don't want to overblow it. I mean, I've had a really nice response, but I'm not deluged with thousands of reader responses. But certainly dozens of people have been in touch, and that's one of the what you've said is one of the suggestions I sometimes receive. But when I say dozens, I mean people who've emailed or actually written,
Right.
believe it still happens, physical letter. I mean, I get messages on Twitter all the time. Um, and
Wait, are you saying people write you physical, like actual pen and ink letters?
it happens when you write something. It's certainly nothing like the same as I wrote a column once in a newspaper in the UK, which is very well known, if not universally well liked, called the Daily Mail. My
Yeah.
God, I got loads of letters. People,
Huh.
some people still actually write letters, but mostly it's emails and then the messages I get on Twitter are just tons and tons of them.
Yeah.
But what as you imply, one of the things people ask is, why don't you do one of these for kids? I suppose I'm not saying no. One, there is a whole world of genuine professional educators
It's true. Yeah.
and people who are trained to do this thing, which I am not. So I'm kind of cautious of that. I mean, thrashing around as an amateur historian, having fun is one thing. Actually, trying to do something scholastic when I'm not
Yeah.
qualified, this is not false modesty; it's accurate modesty. I'm not sure it is a good idea. But the second reason, Brian, I like a bit of smutty.
Yeah.
I like a
That's
dirty
right.
joke. I like a dirty joke
That's
at the
right.
end.
That's right.
I've got a fair number of stories that are quite naughty.
That
And
is right.
those things are not going to. Now, what does sit well with kids is yuck, is
Yeah.
bogeys and poo, and someone's getting their head cut off, and I've got. Well, I remember I told the story of William the Exploder,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
kids love that. Someone who goes bang, the gases inside
Hey,
them
it
make
worked
them
really
pop.
well for the drummers in Spinal Tap, as I recall.
All the way up to 11.
Yeah.
But the but but funnily enough, one, I don't know if you've been following the kind of sensitivity reading interpretations that's been going on over the works of people like Roald Dahl, where the twits are no longer ugly, The witches are no longer warty.
Right.
Nobody's fat anymore. You can't. So you're cutting off a lot of the fun and the kind of stories that I might otherwise have been interested in telling. And two, as I say, I'm not really an expert in it, but it's the hard to reach audience that I think is the I kind of accidentally hit upon a lot of it. Isn't the kids in their 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? It's children in their early teens who've lost an interest in history or think it's really boring, and that's the audience where I've had people get in touch to say, and it's always a variation on my son, my daughter
Yeah.
thought
Yeah.
they hated history, but I gave them a copy of your book and they finished it in the weekend and asked for the next one.
Yeah. Well, we had a few of those that are, I heard those comments from
Yes we
people in
did,
London.
didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we did.
So let's turn back to the poll that we did of our wonderful viewers and listeners, and we asked of our first 49 episodes or 48, I guess probably at the time this came out, what was your favorite? And I will make a small confession right now. If you look at the results of the poll, in fourth place with one vote is our pilot episode, and that vote is me. because I loved everything about that. I loved planning it with you. I
Right.
loved the excitement of doing it for the first time. I loved the fact that either you faked it very well, or you didn't realize that my part of the story was actually about my mom. That was very meaningful
I didn't
to
know that.
me.
I really didn't fake that.
Yeah, and I loved it, but that's one vote, so we'll put that aside. Coming in next place was our live London episode. So let's talk about that. So we went to High Timber Restaurant. Thanks, High Timber. Cheers.
Cheers, High Timber.
Where you have a salad named after you, which I did not try. Um,
It's going to change your world. It's going to change everything you think about salads.
Pulling back the curtain a little bit about that episode, I will say to our listeners and viewers, and those of you who were there know this, we were planning on doing 2 episodes that evening. And because of the generosity
We
of
got so
Palantir
toasted. We
and
got
High
so
Timber,
toasted.
yeah,
Oh,
in
we
between shows, we got to the point where we couldn't do the second show.
yeah. Well, if we'd done it, it would have been mostly burbling and horizontal. So, on balance, we said no. But looking back, maybe we should have done it. I don't know.
Yeah, well, at least we could have put it in the blooper reel. That would have been good. But I love our live. So we had a great time in New York
No, it
in
was great fun.
summer with Mike Cole and Near Yarden, and a special episode that our viewers haven't even seen yet. That's going to be amazing. London was special because a lot of Alex's people were there, and it was very enjoyable.
Thank you. It was great to do. There was a fun episode, and I think it's one of our best. I think it's one of our best episodes online so far.
Yeah. So coming in, I got this out of order. That's actually second favorite. Coming in, third favorite is our Grizzly Goings On episode, our first live episode that we did with our friends at Palantir in Denver, where we talked about a story that I'm sure would appeal to the teenagers you were mentioning, America's most prolific cannibal, most famous cannibal. That was fun because that was done during lockdown, during COVID. And if you remember this, I'm sure you do, we weren't allowed to have a live audience other than the employees of the company because security wouldn't let people in.
Yeah, and they loads of people came and it was great, and we had
Yeah.
in part because of course people hadn't had very limited opportunity to socialize. There was a John Grant, our mutual friend, one of our first
Celebrity bartender.
celebrities on the golf, but he made some amazing cocktails.
Yeah.
And one day we should talk to him about the history of booze, because the man has got more vermouths and syrups and different varieties of spirits in his house than any normal person.
Yes. Well, not to invade John and his partner, his husband's privacy, but as we know, they moved from Amsterdam back to the United States a couple of years ago, and I believe the tab for moving their alcohol was as big as the tab for moving their furniture across the pond.
Yeah, I went to their place in Amsterdam. It was like a bar, so
yeah.
I'm not surprised.
So we'll definitely have John on, but in the meantime, let's plug his podcast. We'll put it in the show notes. It's a Doctor Who podcast. It's excellent.
Yes, and I think it's called No, Not the Mind Probe.
Yeah, no, not the Mind Probe. I
Yes.
think there might be an exclamation point on there. I'm not sure. We'll put that in the show notes. If you're a
Yes,
Doctor Who fan, especially, it's awesome. But even if you aren't, it's just fun to listen to. Not instead of ours, but in addition to ours. Now,
as well as.
roaring in at number one with a bullet, as we said in one of our earlier episodes, is of course the Calcutta Light Horse episode. Our fans love that episode. Even as it was being put out, it was the most popular one we did. I'm not sure. It probably still is the most popular on listener on Spotify. It may not be the most popular on YouTube because
Right.
it was before we did video. But talk about one, how you came to that story, how you came to write it, and why people love it so much.
So, first of all, it's also the most popular story that I told on Twitter. So I take a look at the viewing count of stories online, so that apart from anything else, so I can then put it on the dust jacket of a book and say I've got this many views. That
Sure.
story alone has more than 180,000 reads. So you think I'm telling I've got a couple hundred stories up online so far,
Yeah.
and for one story alone to have 180,000 readers is going some.
Yeah.
And the reason that story first occurred to me was that there's a movie about it that I saw when I was a boy.
Sea
It was,
Wolves.
yes, not a very successful film, despite the fact it's got an amazing cast.
It's
Roger Moore,
solid though. I watched it right before
yeah,
that episode. It's pretty good.
Gregory Peck, David Niven. It's a genuine. It's a Trevor Howard. As you say, it's a very solid film. It's got this ridiculous love interest inserted into it, which is not in the book. The book that I read is about it is by a guy called Lessor, James Lessor, who's still with us, and I paid fulsome tribute to him when
Yeah.
I told the story. So I'd told the story. Sorry, excuse me. I'd watched the movie that tells the story, and then I had a copy, it was done up like novelization of the film type cover with Roger Moore and Gregory Peck on screen.
So it was a
On,
movie before it was a book.
no,
Oh, okay.
it was a proper researched historical book,
Okay.
and the copy I have of that genuine historian's excellent work, it was reproduced after the film as if it were like a novelization, right?
See,
Now, I'm sure he laughed all the way to the bank and didn't mind too much about this trivialization of his excellent research. But he did it properly. He went to the archives. He found out the details about the German deserters coming to the Allied side and so forth. He'd done the research about these guys going the wrong way around India and going on the train across it, and finding out the easiest way to get the Germans off the ship in the neutral port in Goa was to put on a free night at all the brothels to get the sailors
I love that's my
off
favorite part of the story.
off the boats, pouring the whiskey over themselves to prop up the myth, the lie that they were businessmen out on a frolic of their own. James Lisa researched all of these things, and because I was at home, this book, at my parents' home, I mean, this long
Yeah.
forgotten book from my teens was on one of my shelves, and I just picked it up off the shelf, and I was of two minds about telling the story, because of all the stories I've told on Twitter and in the books, it is the most well known because there's a film about it. You
Yeah.
can't say
Yeah.
it's obscure if there's a movie
Right.
about it, but it's also such a banger, and it's so unlikely. And I thought there was life in it yet. And I thought one of the things that had been underemphasized was the quiet dignity of the men who did. They were. I'm not being sexist. They were all men who did it.
Yeah.
The quiet dignity of the men who'd volunteered out of retirement to go and mount this mission. Because when these old buffers went back to Calcutta, they were told by the special operations executives who recruited them to do it, one more thing, chaps, don't tell anyone. The Portuguese whose neutrality they'd violated, Portuguese wouldn't like it, you see, and none of them did.
Yeah.
They took it to their graves. It took research from Lesser in the archives many years later, when the documents were declassified, as you would say, for their story to be told. And I thought that's one of the things I emphasize in my telling of
Yes.
the tale. So also it's tremendous fun. So I love telling it.
Well, and to your last point, these guys, I won't use the British term because I'm not sure what it means, but these elderly guys who kept their mouth shut for the rest of their lives, I would like to think that would happen today, but boy, I mean, every former CIA officer wants to go on TV. You know, we've got these leaks out of the Pentagon right now as we record this in April 2023.
Bryan,
I
can I
hope you're
check
right.
that that's true that every former CIA officer wants to go on TV? Bryan, is that true?
It's an exaggeration. Let me rephrase. Many more than would have wanted to 25 years ago. And by the way, of course, I'm one of them, but I don't go on TV and give away classified information.
No,
A lot of them do.
and I didn't mean to imply that you did. Or if I did, I'm sorry,
No,
but
no, no,
I don't think I did.
no.
Of
I'm just saying the culture of fame in some ways has overtaken the honor of secrecy. I think,
Well,
unfortunately.
that's right. And so when these guys from the Calcutta Light Horse went back to went back home, obviously with indecent haste, Britain disavailed itself of empire, and I mean that sincerely. It's not just the speed with which we sought to throw off our colonial ties itself caused problems.
Hmm.
Now, of course, that was less the case in India with independence in 47, but um, the Calcutta Light Horse was promptly disbanded after the war. Um, I One of the things I say in the book is that I dare say that these men didn't mind the lack of publicity one bit, but they disliked the ignominious disbanding of their famous
Yeah,
and
heroic.
proud regiment a great deal.
Yeah. So I just want to circle back to this point you made earlier, which I don't think I knew from when we did the episode, which is that the version of the actual historical book that was put out after the movie was pitched as and publicized as you know, fictionalization, a novelization of the movie.
Yeah, it so that I haven't got the copy in front of me because it's in various endeavors, but it didn't say novelization of the film, but it says as told in the film The
Right,
Seawolves, with a big
right,
picture of Roger Moore, a big
right.
picture of I think Gregory Peck, and a picture of the woman who's not even in the book.
Right. Roger
Roger
Moore,
Moore's love interest.
your favorite Bond.
He's
So
clearly the best James Bond. I'm not getting into
I'm
that
going to
argument.
tell a very quick Gregory Peck story, which I just read yesterday. But on this point of the novelization, have you ever seen the stage musical The Book of Mormon?
No, I did see Jerry Springer the opera, but I didn't see Book of Mormon.
So I have been very transparent on our show that my father was an Episcopal minister, and I don't blow shit on anyone's religion because we only exist because Henry VIII wanted a divorce, blah blah blah. However, I did go to see the Book of Mormon, and the star, I won't say that protagonist because he's not portrayed positively, but the main character is Brother Cunningham, no relation, fictional character, and this musical. You really should see it. Everyone should see it. It skewers a lot of the fundamental things about Mormonism and Mormon theology, but it's always kind of sympathetic too. Like it's not an attack. It's not a hit piece, but it does expose a lot of the, let's just say, inconsistencies of some of the Mormon tradition. But the point of the story is you go to the musical, at least the two times I've seen it, you get the playbill out, the brochure that they give you at the theater. You open it to the cast page, and right next to it, and this happened twice, so I bet it happens every time. Right next to it is a full page ad for the actual Mormon church. And the tagline is, "You've seen the musical, now read the book." www.Church of Latter-day Saints.
Why not, right? Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Spread your bread upon the waters. I rather admire the Church of Mormon's not a lot short of chutzpah anyway, but you got to admire the chutzpah in that.
Absolutely.
I want to explain that what I just said wasn't just a throwaway remark. When Mormons come to places to proselytize, sometimes they go to more challenging places, I'm sure, but quite often in the past, at least, they used to come to the UK. which sounds like a pretty easy gig. And I suppose you're looking to fish where the fish are and convert people you could convert. And they, like detectives, they hunt in pairs, except unless you're a Russian detective, when you
Or
hunt in.
Columbo.
Yes, indeed. If you're as good as Columbo, you hunt as an individual. If you're most detectives, you hunt in pairs. If you're Russian detectives, you hunt as a pair, as threes: one who can read, one who can write, one to watch over the intellectuals. And the pair in the Mormon pairing is always a senior and a junior. So they do this for 2 years. The one who's done it for a year, and then the new guy. And I was approached by a pair of Mormons, and they said, "Are you interested in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?" I said, "I am interested. I'm not. This is not a joke. This happened." I said, "I am interested. I'm interested to know how you can justify the practice of posthumous baptism." And this the younger one sought earnestly to explain for like 30 seconds, and the older one tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Come on, come on, let's go try someone else," because your parents will have been baptized into the Church of Mormon. Your grandparents will have been
Oh yeah,
baptized into the
and
Church of
they're
Mormon.
part of the tally. And
Yeah.
when natural disasters happen, you'll get some enterprising folks who will baptize all those people, because then they count in your heavens accounting. I don't know what it is, but it's funny. We're gonna close it up here soon. But what the story you just told reminded me of. Actually, my first job out of college was as a field director for a United States Senate campaign in the state of Iowa. And this is not going to give anything away. Everybody knows I'm old. This is 1984. And our candidate was a sitting member of Congress. He's a Watergate baby. He tried to get elected in 1972, lost. He won in 1974. And midway through the campaign, he brings us all into campaign headquarters because he knows we're all getting burned out and tired of walking around and knocking on doors and getting chewed out and all that stuff that happens in the campaign that you know better than I do these days. And he says, "I want to tell you guys a story. I ran for Congress for the first time in 1972, and I lost by 30,000 votes. And I spent the next 2 years knocking on every single door in my district, and I won by 30,000 votes. And so I want you to be out there every day pushing the message as enthusiastically and hard as you can. However, there come days when the soul must be fed." He said, "I remember I was knocking on a door in a part of my district that I knew I would never get their vote because of my ideology and their ideology. And I go to the door and I put my hand out and I have my little pamphlet from the campaign and I say, 'Hey, I'm so and so, and I would love to be your next congressman. Can I chat with you?' And the elderly man behind the door says, 'You're a goddamn communist bloodsucker, and I would never put you in the Congress for all the money in the world.'" This is like day 120 of my campaign, and it's probably the 110th door I've knocked on, and pretty clear I'm not getting this guy's vote anyway. So I take my brochure and I start to roll it up into a little tube in my hands. And I say, "Well, sir, I appreciate your opinion, but two things are very clear to me. One, I'm never going to get your vote anyway. And two, pretty likely you can't read. So why don't you just take this and shove it right up your ass?" And I never actually did that myself, but it was kind of inspirational, I have to say.
There's a former member of parliament in the UK called Bob Marshall Andrew, who was famously interviewed on a doorstep and found out that the person he was a Labour Party member, but not particularly left wing. First of all, every time the election was closed and they went to the count, he would give a live interview and say, "I've lost. I've been destroyed by the terrible leadership of my party, these morons." And several hours later, he called back to the count when he'd just scraped in and won and had to say, "Well, I've, on reflection, and here I'm willing to serve. Maybe the party's not so bad." Anyway, he was famously with journalists with him. And he found this guy on the doorstep who had views he didn't like. And Marshall Andrews said, given what you've said, you mustn't vote for me." And the guy said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "I forbid you from voting for me." Well, hang on. What is a free ballot? You are not allowed to vote for me. I'll do what I want.
Classic reverse psychology.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Well,
So
it's
then
good talking to you. Good 50th episode, my friend.
well, you've inspired me to say to our many, many, many loyal viewers and listeners, do not tell your friends about this podcast. Do not give us a 5-star review on Spotify. Do not like us on Twitter. In fact, ignore our entire existence.
Yeah, I do. And can I give one little plug? Because I am going to be speaking at the Hartford Literary Festival on Friday, the 30th of June, telling stories like this. We'll find a link to the festival and put it in the show notes.
We will. And although our viewers love superstitious stories, don't stay away just because it's Friday the 13th.
30th,
Love doing this
30th,
with you. Here's
30th.
to another 50 episodes.
Thanks, brother. Cheers.
Cheers.